My name is Tyler Kreipke. I am currently a graduate researcher, recently having defended my PhD at the University of Notre Dame. My current residence is at the O'Hara Grace Townhouses on the northeast side of campus, and my hometown is Zionsville, Indiana, just on the northwest side of Indianapolis. And this August, I plan to pursue religious studies or priestly formation at Moreau Seminary. So after graduating from Zionsville High School, I attended Rose-Hulman Institute of Technology down in Terre Haute. It's a small engineering school about 4 hours south of here, right on the Illinois-Indiana border, about halfway down the state. Really small engineering school, very focused on teaching and on their undergraduate program. So I went there. My uncle had gone there. I was able to run cross-country and track there, which was important to me. And I just liked the atmosphere of the school. It was very focused on engineering. That's pretty much the only major they have other than a couple sciences here and there. But I pursued my Bachelor of Science in Biomedical Engineering at Rose-Hulman. And then junior year, I realized that I wanted to pursue those studies a little further. I had a roommate my sophomore year in my fraternity who had come here for his graduate studies, which got me looking at Notre Dame as well. And then when I came up and visited, just everything seemed to click while I was here. It just felt like home. And so some of the research that was being done here seemed really interesting to me. And so after receiving my Bachelor of Science in Biomedical Engineering at Rose-Hulman, I decided to continue studying bioengineering here at Notre Dame with the hopes of receiving my PhD. I decided that I wanted to be an engineer probably about in late middle school, early high school. I was feeling drawn to math and science, you know, that old shtick, that old trope. But I think I remember when it was early on in high school, I was looking more towards electrical engineering and that type of stuff. But my junior year, I believe, I took an anatomy and physiology course and was just captivated by it, loved the material. The human body is just so complex and interesting that it just sort of really captured my attention. And looking around at some of the different engineering options out there, especially at Rose-Hulman, biomedical engineering just seemed to be a very good fit for that. And so I think I had always kind of planned on going into some sort of technical field with my draw toward math and the sciences, but it didn't really get honed in on biomedical engineering until probably my junior or senior year of high school. My father's a physician as well. He's a radiologist, and so I had always kind of, been in that sort of context or atmosphere of the medical profession. Obviously, I respect him very much in his, intellectual capacity and curiosity. And I'm inspired by that as well. And so it just kind of, looking back, seems like a very natural fit. My brother actually just received his PhD in exercise physiology, so our whole family's kind of been in that sort of science of the human body field, and so it just kind of seemed like the natural progression. But yeah, again, just going into sort of the intricacies of how muscles work, how neurons fire, how all those sorts of things, how bones remodel and support loads and all those things was just really interesting, and just like I said, really captivated my imagination. And so yeah, it just seemed like a normal fit or a natural fit to go into this field where I'd be looking at the biological aspects of the human body, but then also seeing how it meshed with mathematical principles and the tenets of engineering. I have been a career student so far, and looks like I will continue to be, although in a little different capacity for the next couple of years as well. But yeah, so I'll say that my education and the career have been very similar, although grad school has given me a little different insight, where I started off largely taking classes, doing a little research here and there on the side where I had time. because I had a pretty full course load my first year or two while I was here. But one of the things about grad school with the PhD is that as you progress through it, it becomes less focused on the coursework and more focused on the research. And so it's been really interesting and really challenging at other times to kind of make that shift there into research, where in the classroom it's largely, okay, think your way through this problem and tell us what you would do. And then when you get to research, it's like, okay, now go do that. And just kind of learning to sort of navigate the obstacles and the challenges of research has been really sort of eye-opening and really enriching and helpful in sort of guiding my thought processes as an engineer. And I'd say that in grad school, the focus has shifted, where in undergrad I was looking more at the trees, in grad school we're looking more at the forest, where I don't feel as technically able with like differential equations or a lot of stuff that you learn early on in undergrad, just from time away from that. But I feel like I'm much better equipped to sort of deal with the larger problems, data interpretation, sort of looking at the larger questions and seeing the connections between different parts of the field and different papers and the primary literature out there. And so there's that ability to go back, and when I need to focus on something like programming or differential equations or math, I can pick that back up. But it's been more of this taking a step back and sort of seeing the connecting points between fields and between different bits of research out there, and learning to synthesize and evaluate from that. So I just wrapped up my dissertation. I have a project that I'll be working on this summer to help out, just wrap up some loose ends with an old project for my advisor. But my research was largely focused on trabecular bone, which is a porous type of bone that's located sort of more inside the bones, if you will, where a lot of the metabolic processes go on. Since it's porous, that's where the bone marrow resides. And I've been kind of looking at how the structure, the mechanics, and the biology of trabecular bone are related, especially in the context of osteoporosis. So I was looking at sort of how the structure affected the solid mechanics of the bone, affected the progression of micro damage through the bone, which has been tied to reductions in the bone's mechanical competence, which is obviously tied to fracture risk. I looked at how the solid phase structure affected the fluid mechanics, which has larger implications for the mechanobiology of the bone, where mechanobiology is this idea that mechanical signals introduced to the cells affect the functionality or the genetic expression or phenotype of the cells. And so we were going in, and for the third project in my dissertation was to apply loading to explants of trabecular bone so that we could stimulate the bone marrow without bringing in some other type of signaling pathways, to look at just how the marrow was contributing to that. And we saw that there was an effect on the structure of the bone. And so I was, from that dissertation, seeing that the solid phase structure affected the solid mechanics of the trabecular bone. It affected the solid phase structure affected the fluid mechanics of the trabecular bone, and that in turn there was also this effect of the fluid phase mechanics on the solid phase structure. And so just kind of teasing out, okay, what's contributing to the mechanical competence of the bone, what's contributing to the architecture, and how are these sort of interrelated in the context specifically of looking at how could we possibly use this information to help develop better diagnostic criteria or better treatment strategies for osteoporosis. It's been very graced, let's say that. So I was actually raised Methodist, and my senior year of high school, before I went off to college, I was thinking, okay, I've been going to the Methodist church all my life, and I could just go and find a nice Methodist church down in Terre Haute by Rose-Hulman and go to that for the next 4 years. But I sort of saw it as an opportunity to really start to dig into my faith, because, I'd been a good standard Christian, church every Sunday with the family, but just hadn't really taken it seriously on the level that it should be taken. And so I started, with this idea of, I'm going to see what's out there and what draws me to it. And luckily enough, thanks be to God, I had a friend who was going into the Catholic seminary at the time, and when he heard that was my plan, he jumped all over it and got me sort of talking about the tenets of Catholicism, what it was what it wasn't, more importantly, because I was, I think in my sophomore year, I remember specifically in my sophomore year of high school, I was about as anti-Catholic in terms of theology as they came. And so he sort of started untangling the confusion that I thought Catholicism was, got me talking to a priest with questions that I had, attending Mass regularly, and yeah, it just sort of, I'm not exactly sure what kept me going to Mass other than, looking back, the grace of God, because there wasn't like this profound moment of, oh, I see the light, like it's Catholicism. It was just sort of this very graced, sort of gradual drawing toward the faith. And when I got down to college after having spent the summer exploring Catholicism, I was able to find a parish to start going to down there. One of the seniors on the cross-country team was Catholic as well. And so he kind of got me set up going to the university parish down at Terre Haute. And, I kind of dilly-dallied over the next 4 years using the excuse of, oh, I'm too busy to go through RCIA. It's too long of a process. I have this, that, and the other going on. I kind of wanted to go through it at my home parish, and I didn't really know what all went into it. But needless to say, I spent 4 years going to Mass, but not actually receiving the Eucharist or having gone through confirmation or anything like that. But then I came up to Notre Dame, and it was like, okay, it's time to take care of this now. And I started looking at RCIA options, and the one that fit best for me was to go to St. Joseph's Parish in town on Wednesday nights. And so my first year converted to Catholicism, and that was sort of my story towards the faith of Catholicism, was, just sort of this long, gently guided journey toward the faith that culminated when I got to Notre Dame. And so it's just been this very graced journey that, as I look back, it just, it's hard to believe, just these little things that here and there that brought me here. Yeah, and so the vocation story is just the faith story part two. So when I was in grad school, during my second year, I was under quite a bit of stress, and in the winter of my second year, I remember going through a bit of a depressive, scrupulous, anxious episode where I was just kind of in a very weird headspace. And I remember reaching out to the pastor where I converted to Catholicism, Father John DeRiso, and he just sort of helped talk me through it, as well as some of my other graduate student friends who were Catholic as well. And while I was dealing with these sort of, this sort of weird headspace, or this very difficult time, I was really graced to be able to use that as an opportunity to really dig into my faith, because as I look back at it now, it was just sort of kind of coming to grips with the world as it is, who I was as a person, who I wanted to be as a person, and the only real way I saw myself moving forward was in the context of my faith. That was the only way that any of this made any sense, and so it was just sort of that opportunity to really start to dig into my faith and really see, how deep it went and what it really meant. And while I was going through this, I had this initial sort of fleeing into the cloth response where it was like, maybe I should just go be a monk in the Italian hills and not have to worry about this, that, or the other. But with good advice from my friends, I was able to sort of move past that, and I got into a better headspace. Things started shifting, and I had this greater understanding and greater appreciation for my faith. And I remember very specifically, I don't remember the day, but I was driving to jujitsu one day. I do jujitsu as just one of my hobbies, and I was driving to practice one day, and just sort of very distinct from myself, but sort of welling up from within me, I heard the call of, well, maybe you should look into the priesthood. And I freaked out. Like, it was just like, no way, like, I can't do this. I had just sort of seen, priests move on from my home parish, and it was just like, I can't just get chewed up in the gears of the Vatican or anything like that, just be another cog in the machine. But the question persisted, and so finally I reached out to Father John DeRiso, the pastor where I converted, and as well as Father Thomas McNally, who I had gotten to know doing prison ministry over the past couple of years, and just talked to them about what the priesthood was, what the priesthood wasn't. They sort of allayed the fears of just like, okay, the church doesn't care anything about its priests; they're just means to administer the sacraments and not, people in themselves. Which, as I say it now, it just sounds ridiculous, but you know how things go when you're in your own head. And so yeah, they were kind of my starting point, talking to the church in that context. And they got me in touch with the vocations office. Father Jim Gallagher was still doing vocations at the time. He got me in going into Lucianarium at the seminary to get to know the community a little better. They had some good vocational discernment lecture series or luncheon series that I started going to, which gave some good advice in terms of that, and was able to start me on the path of doing daily mass, daily prayer, and silent meditation, and all those good things. And at daily mass, I met my current spiritual advisor, Sister Carmen Gillick, who was actually the reason that I knew her was because she was one of the helpers at the University Parish down in Terre Haute. So I recognized her, introduced myself. Here we are, 3 years later, still meeting once a month. But again, it was just sort of very much like my faith journey, where it was this sort of, okay, nothing, no epiphanies, no God coming down from the sky in the chariot saying this is what you're going to do with your life, but just this very gentle pull, persistent question toward, okay, should I go to the priesthood? Should I explore this more? And being in my PhD, all the Holy Cross priests were like, finish your PhD, then we'll talk. And that just gave me the time to get to know the community at the seminary a little better, to deepen my faith life, deepen my prayer life, to be near the sacraments, to receive the sacraments, and just to really think about that question. And as I went, it just seemed more and more like that was where I was drawn. And I just sort of fell in love with the idea of this very romanticized version of waking up with the community, saying or praying the hours, celebrating Mass with them, taking classes while I need to, but then just going out and being a presence in the world. And so there was just that very deep draw where when I looked forward in my life, I could really see living and enjoying and being fulfilled by that sort of life. And so in September of this past year, 2016, I decided to apply to the seminary and was accepted, and that's sort of been the story up to now. Yeah, I would say that it's sort of been the other way around, where my faith has played a role in my being an engineer, because since for the past couple of years, like, everything in my life has been viewed in the context of God, and being able to offer up everything that I do to His glory. And so, any type of work, regardless of what it is, whether it's the highest level thinking or whether it's very, menial physical labor, they both are contributing to God's will being done if it's offered up to Him. And so I've kind of tried to nest my work as an engineer in that, specifically looking at the idea of God as the true and the good and the beautiful, where engineering is paying tribute or contributing to the revelation of God as truth. And so there's this intelligible creation out there that we've been trying to figure out for the past however many thousand years, and I'm just another step in that process where trying to figure out sort of what's going on in the human body, again with the ultimate aim of improving the quality of life, but just trying to figure out what's going on essentially, and reveal some small aspect of God's truth and God's intelligibility. And so in terms of being an engineer, that's sort of how I nest the idea of my work of let's offer this up to God as the true. And then not more specifically, but in a different context, I've really found fulfillment in my abilities to work in a teaching capacity at this university. I don't mind the research, don't get me wrong, but it's not my passion. Having been able to work with students as a TA, or I've been instructing a course this past year where I'm actually able to interact with the students on twice weekly basis, has just been really great. I feel very fulfilled to kind of pass on the knowledge that's been gained to another generation of engineers and sort of enable them. And I just don't feel like my calling is as a researcher, if I'm being brutally honest. I don't think it's my gift as an engineer, but I do feel this better ability to sort of digest what's out there and help make it accessible to other people or new generations of engineers, and to enable them to continue and pursue that research. And so, yeah, I've just found this great satisfaction in that revelation of the truth. And there's just something about that sort of aha moment when you're working with a student to try and get them to understand the concept, and it just clicks and it goes. There's just something that's very rewarding about that. And so, bringing that idea of service to others in this capacity, trying to help some student understand some underlying concept in engineering that they can then apply further in their career. Part of me wants to say it seemed like a bit of waiting in the wings, but at the other time, I just don't buy into that. There's so much going on that's not the way God works. We don't just have waiting periods where we're hoping to do something in the future. We can always be doing something for His glory. And so my life right now is just, it's very blessed. It's different than what it's going to be, but I see it as sort of an anticipation of how things are going to be. So my typical day is I'll wake up, and there's a very good faith community at Fisher O'Hara Grace where I live, and I'll go in for the first part of my day. It's 10 to 15 minutes of just silent meditation in the presence of the Eucharist, and just that sort of kind of getting my mind in the right mindset. And then after that, there's a guy at the O'Hara Grace community who's like 2 steps away from being a Benedictine monk, but he's gotten a very good ritual or practice of morning prayer at the community, where we'll actually sing morning prayer every morning, and then immediately following that we'll have Mass. And so the first part of my day sort of places in that context of, okay, let's offer this up to God. And then I go to work 2 days a week. I typically just head to Stinson-Remick, where I teach my class, and go through with all that. On the other days, I'll head up to the multidisciplinary research building on the north side of campus where I work. And I haven't spent much time in the lab recently, but a lot of it's data analysis or writing papers. I was working on my dissertation a lot recently, but in general, it's either going to Stinson-Remick to teach or going to my office to do some type of engineering work. And again, it's not always that, I specifically okay, how is this giving glory to God? But it's just sort of seated in that context, or that's the hope, that it's seated in that context from my early morning practices to be, okay, let's offer this up. And just going about and doing my job is sort of the way that I do that. And so after I leave work, I'll typically go just do some minor exercise. But then on Thursday nights, I am able to, the seminary opens up and there's Lucianarium where you get to know the community very well. It's an incredibly beautiful prayer service, incredibly powerful prayer service, where they sing the Psalms and do a reading and a homily, and that's just been a great experience. Afterwards, they have a social where you get to go and spend time with the seminarians, and just getting to know them. They just seem like very authentic, genuine people that I like to be around, and it's just felt like this very good fit. And so I would say my life now, again, is that anticipation where I'm waking up and, placing my day in the context of a faith-filled life, go and do my work in that underlying mindset, and then, when the day is done, relax a little bit as we're supposed to, but then, again, try and wrap it up, especially before bed, with some more prayer, sort of looking back, resetting myself in that mindset, and just sort of this idea of seeding everything in the context of a faith-filled life and letting the rest take care of itself from there. Yeah, I mean, offered up, I suppose. There's a great service that can be done from engineers. I don't think anyone in today's society is going to question the service that engineers are doing for people. And so just the ability to do that service from the unselfish context of Christian service, where I'm not going to be an engineer so that I can get a good paycheck and get the respect of the world or get the respect of society or anything like that. I'm going to do this because I feel that I have this gift from God for technical thought, and I can use that to improve the lives of those around me. And so, yeah, if you want to live a life of virtue, an engineer is a great way to do that. There's a lot of good that you can do for the world, and so go forth, do it. But again, try and keep in mind or keep it in that context of, that I'm doing this as an offering or as service to God. Yeah, and I would say carry on in engineering. So I've been very surprised actually by the number of priests that I've met or seminarians that I've met at Moreau that have a technical background. And so I think that it's great to have that sort of technical training. If you spend your undergrad doing philosophy, there's certainly nothing wrong with that, but there's still going to be philosophy and theology waiting for you at the seminary. And so I think that it's a good idea to have some sort of technical training if that's what you feel called to or what you're interested in. And I think it's especially useful nowadays because there's this ridiculous conflict between religion and science that society seems to have perceived, where it's just like, oh, the two are mutually exclusive. You can't be a person of faith and a person of science, and it's just complete nonsense. But I think that in a society that wants to sort of drive that wedge between the two and make them into their own separate things, that it's very useful and a very great benefit to the church and to society to have people that understand what science is actually getting after and what faith is actually getting after, and being able to sort of be a beacon to reconciliation of those two fields. And so I would say if you like engineering and you're thinking about engineering, great, go with it, see where it takes you. And then if you feel throughout that time that you're called to religious life, there's going to be nothing that stops you with that. And so if you think, okay, well, I liked engineering, but now I'm just going to switch over to philosophy just because I think that's going to help with religious life, don't worry about it. The philosophy will be there when you get there. I think that there's a great benefit, again, to both the church and society to have people that are able to be fluent in both languages and carry on that conversation to help bring about a reconciliation between those two. Yeah. Oh man, if I could go back and talk to high school Tyler, there'd be a lot of things I would tell him. But I think the biggest piece of advice that I would have given to my past self or to any younger person is just, you know, God moves in his own time. Take your time. Don't worry about it. I remember when I was 18, going off to college, I felt like I had to have it all figured out. And when I was 18 or 17 even, I was a Methodist, soon-to-be engineering student that was going to work in the prosthetics field, find myself a nice woman to settle down with, have some kids, and get the white picket fence and the golden retriever and all those things. And now here I sit as a 28-year-old man going into the Catholic priesthood, or the Catholic seminary at least. And so just allowing yourself that time or that ability to listen to God as he does his work in his own time, and realizing that you don't have to have it all figured out when you're that young. You're going to make mistakes. You're going to go down different roads. There are going to be different byways that you'll tend to wander down. But just allow yourself time, because you do a lot of growing up in your 20s, and so just allowing yourself that time and the patience with yourself, and that sort of trusting humility to let God do his work, and to sort of let him guide you where you're going to go, because there's not, except in very rare cases, there's not going to be that epiphany moment where it's just, okay, this is the course of your life from now on. It's always just this next step of, okay, this is where I feel I'm being led for this next step, so let's take it, and then we'll see where the next step takes me. And it's not just this thing that you have to have figured out all at once. Let it come step by step in God's good time. So that I would say would be good advice for my past self, for my current self, and then for anyone that's kind of coming up in their faith and in their education as well.